they didn't really conclude whether it was the result of the smoothness or the improvement of texture, right? So, but the ultimate thing was that when comparing a pavement that was diamond ground versus not diamond ground, they saw a reduction in vehicle accidents. So when we do diamond grinding, we're adding a longitudinally directioned corduroy-like texture. So this adds macro texture to the section, and it can help add friction to the tires so that vehicles can stop more safely.
Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about IGGA. Tell us something about the organization, what it is, and what it does.
Yeah, so the International Grooving and Grinding Association is a trade association, and we're backed by a group of contractors, manufacturers of materials, as well as saw blades and equipment. And the goal is to be a technical liaison between the industry and government agencies in an effort to make sure that engineers have the proper tools in their toolbox in order to make the best decisions when it comes to highway repair and rehabilitation.
Well, let's talk about one of those options. You recently put out a paper about smooth concrete. And in layman's terms, what do you mean by that term, smooth concrete?
Sure. So, effectively, when we build a pavement, there's a natural tendency based on work construction, the stopping and starting of pavement operations, hand workmanship, things of this nature, potentially material impacts, such as slab curl or something like that, that can cause the pavement to have a bit of a wavelength, if you will, right? So, as you're traveling over a section, you have some bumps, some high spots, some low spots that cause vehicles to bounce up and down as they go across that pavement section. Now that smoothness is measured in terms of an international roughness index. And the unit for that is inches per mile, right? So how many inches of variation do we have over the course of a mile? The goal of having a smooth pavement is to have the lowest international roughness index possible, right? So typically we're seeing, 150 inches per mile would be a pretty rough pavement, quite uncomfortable, could cause premature damage to the pavement based on the weight of trucks bouncing up and down on that pavement. It can cause safety issues, right? If you lose control of your vehicle due to the bumpiness, it could also cause car sickness, things of this nature. A very smooth pavement would be something sub 40 inches per mile. And we typically recommend a DOT or a government agency to consider rehabilitation around that 100-inch per mile, right? If we can keep our pavement smooth, they'll stay smooth longer. And that has to do with that relationship between those bumps causing premature structural deterioration of the pavement.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So basically, what we are talking about when we're talking about diamond grinding a pavement or making a pavement smoother, ultimately our goal is simply to repair any potholes, surface spalling, texture issues, and then reducing that international roughness at the end of that effort.
So essentially, we're not talking about a different form of concrete. We're talking about how the concrete is installed, how it's maintained.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. In a document you set out, you cited some figures in terms of how much could be saved by a single truck by running on smooth concrete versus other road surfaces. And I noticed that it also depended to some extent on where you were looking geographically. Can you kind of go over those figures and what you found?
Sure. So there's two elements to fuel economy with respect to pavements. The first one is, of course, the smoothness, right? As I mentioned before, if we improve the smoothness of the pavement, we increase the efficiency at which a vehicle can traverse that pavement. So the outcome of that, and we built a calculator in partnership with the MIT Concrete Sustainability Hub, and that calculator's goal was to quantify the fuel economy benefit. Of course, these days, carbon is a huge factor when it comes to infrastructure needs and things like that. So this use phase carbon impact from improving fuel economy has a huge impact on that. The second element when it comes to fuel economy is the material type. We have both rigid and we have flexible pavement types in our highway system. A rigid would traditionally be a concrete pavement, and a flexible would typically be an asphalt pavement. Now, when you're driving with a heavy vehicle, like a tractor trailer, on a flexible pavement, the weight of that vehicle impresses upon that pavement and causes almost what I like to define as a mattress effect, right? So if you were to put a bowling ball on a mattress, it sinks into the mattress. So you create this environment where the vehicle feels as though it's subtly but continuously rolling uphill. So there's a fuel economy benefit there as well. So we have actually two calculators that were built with the MIT, one to quantify the smoothness and one to quantify the impact of the rigid versus flexible pavement type. So some of these benefits that we're showing now, particularly in our southern regions where we have a hotter climate, it has a tendency to make the asphalt a little bit softer than in our northern climates where we have longer winters. So the outcome of that is that we have more of an impact with that rigid versus flexible calculation in the southern region of the country than in the northern region of the country. But if we were to take, for instance, a very smooth concrete pavement and compare it to a mid-condition asphalt pavement, we can see a savings of about 0.6 cents per truck per mile in the northeastern climates of the country. And then we can get that down to 1.8 or even 2.1 cents per truck per mile in places like Texas or Florida, respectively. So, there's a decent savings there, and it may not sound like a whole lot if you're, traveling 100 miles in one tractor trailer. But when we're looking at the entire highway system and we're evaluating the impact of a highway that has 10,000, 15,000 trucks driving across it each day, that can really add up to a significant amount of carbon savings in our highway system.
I'm curious, how common is it for state departments of transportation to use, or I should say, to meet the standard of smooth concrete in highway construction? Is this something that's happening a lot? Is it something that's maybe more rare that you'd like to see happen more often?
So virtually every state across America has their own specification and requirements for smoothness. Generally, they're pretty close in terms of what their expectations are. They typically like to see pavements, sub 75 inches per mile for final acceptance of a construction project. So fair, fair condition. Um, I think the Federal Highway Authority, they call upon something around 175 inches per mile as the standard for what is considered bad pavement, right? So all of the states have to accommodate some effort to remain sub 175 in order to get good ratings, which ultimately translates to federal funding for their highway system. So all the states are doing this. Diamond grinding as a method to improve ride quality is quite common. It's was started in the 60s. It became more popular into the 70s and thereafter. And it is basically like driving a belt sander over the pavement, right? So we're removing some of those high spots from the pavement to make that pavement smoother. And it's actually becoming quite commonplace and is the primary remediation technique for smoothness, and is quite effective at remediating friction as well, right? Which is an improvement for safety. The outcome of it all is basically, yeah, that the DOTs are using it, but our goal is to make sure they use it more. I want to give you a little example of economics associated with it. Diamond grinding can typically be performed on a highway for about $5, $6, $7 per square yard of pavement surface, right? So we're talking about 9 square feet when we're talking about a square yard. I recently remodeled my kitchen in my house, and it cost me about $5 to $6 per square foot of the flooring in that kitchen. Okay, so when we're comparing that to a highway surface remediation technique, we're talking significantly cheaper, and it is by far the cheapest smoothness improvement compared to doing an asphalt overlay or something like that.
I'm curious, looking at these various techniques and the cost of smooth concrete, the cost of, as you said, diamond grinding on pavement, have you performed a cost benefit analysis looking at the types of savings that you discussed, like fuel economy, potential damage to vehicles, and so on, versus the cost?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. I have an example right here in front of me, and this is a real project that was given to us by one of our contractor members, and it was confirmed by the DOT. The project started before diamond grinding. It was 98 inches per mile was the IRI. And after diamond grinding, they got it down to 43 inches per mile. So a significant improvement, about 50% smoother. And that particular pavement had 39,152 vehicles on it every day. With a 15% truck factor. So that's a significant amount of traffic. The length of the project was 6.6 miles, and it was four lanes wide. So a little over 24 total lane miles of highway remediation performed there. Now, the cost of grinding was $4.60. And we plugged all that information into this calculator that we built with MIT, and I got a total benefit here. So in 10 years, we had a fuel savings for smoothness of $3.9 million, which equated to 4,500 metric tons of carbon savings. And then with that, we had the cost of grinding was $854,000 with a carbon impact with the fuel to power the equipment to do the work at 250 metric tons of carbon impact. We also have another factor there, which is carbon sequestration. So one of the things about concrete is it has this natural tendency to absorb carbon out of the atmosphere like a sponge. And over time, we start to see that process slow down as those pores fill with the carbon. So when we diamond grind, we reopen that pore structure and restart that process. So the carbon sequestration, the carbon sequestration accounted for with the diamond grinding effort was about an additional 20 metric tons of savings. So all in all, the total benefit when we had the savings on fuel compared to the cost of diamond grinding, we had $3 million in savings for fuel and 4,300 metric tons in savings for fuel. And that was just in 10 years' time. And typically we see our diamond grinding textures last in excess of 15 years. So we also in our calculator include a 20-year benefit, right? Because that's a little bit more of an optimistic look at what we can expect to see. And that's closer to $7 million in savings at the pump for our taxpayers.
Okay. You've mentioned a number of times kind of the big picture in terms of, for example, you've mentioned reduction of carbon into the atmosphere on a number of occasions there. Our audience is made up of individual truck drivers. Many of them, in fact, possibly the majority, are one truck operations. From their point of view, you've mentioned fuel savings a couple of times. What other factors are there that make a difference to that individual truck driver? I mean, for example, vehicle maintenance, and I think one of your documents mentioned damage to freight. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, going back to that smoothness thing, right? If you have a localized bump that causes the vehicle to drop or jump off the pavement, you could have freight damage. And the extent of what that is in the highway system is hard to quantify, but often that damage is going to fall back on the trucker or the person who they're moving freight for, right? So that could cause, I don't know if it would fall on the insurance or whatever, but it's going to cause a cost or a risk to the trucking industry at large. And then we also have the state of Wisconsin. They did a research study on safety in their state, and they had a 42% reduction in vehicle accidents in dry weather and a 57% reduction in wet weather accidents on pavements that were diamond ground. So these are significant improvements of safety, and it actually can afford the argument that we should be looking at diamond grinding on all surface textures, both concrete and asphalt, right? There's no reason why you can't diamond grind asphalt if you have a safety consideration. But according to research, we're looking at about 500,000 truck accidents per year. So if we can reduce that number of truck accidents, obviously we all have loved ones. We want to make sure they get home safely. And, of course, we all have the consideration of the economic impact of a car accident or a truck accident. God forbid your truck is damaged severely and you need to take it off the road for a few weeks. So that's where it can really impact an individual truck driver.
You mentioned the reduction in accidents in Wisconsin. Did they establish what about the smooth concrete was leading to the reduction in accidents? Why that was happening?
So they didn't really conclude whether it was the result of the smoothness or the improvement of texture, right? So, but the ultimate thing was that when comparing a pavement that was diamond ground versus not diamond ground, they saw a reduction in vehicle accidents. So when we do diamond grinding, we're adding a longitudinally directioned corduroy-like texture. So this adds macro texture to the section, and it can help add friction to the tires so that vehicles can stop more safely. And that's where I think a lot of it comes from. One of the other tools in our toolbox in the grinding and grooving world is the grooving, right? If we do grooving, it's similar to the diamond grinding, with the exception that the saw blades are 3/4 of an inch on center. So rather than making the pavement smoother, we're simply adding a reservoir for rainwater to get into, to ensure that that pavement can come up through that rainwater and touch those tires, so we don't hydroplane or risk losing control in wet weather events. So that's another tool in the toolbox that can help prevent vehicle accidents as well.
Okay. Um, I'm sorry. This would seem to a casual observer like we're talking about opposites here: smooth pavement, grooved pavement. And it's kind of interesting to me that you mentioned that. Um, as I said, to the casual observer, that might seem contradictory. Are those terms contradictory? I mean, can you have both?
Both grooved and grinding on the same
Yeah,
pavement?
yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely can. So that grooving effort is really more for the hydroplaning benefit. The grinding is for the remediation of the ride quality as well as the friction, right? And we actually have we consider it like our Cadillac of surface texturing, right? It's called the next generation concrete surface. And what this is an even tighter stack grinding method where we basically cut off all the positive surface texture, and then we come back and we safety groove it. So now what we end up with a uh, optimally smooth pavement and the optimal macro texture benefits to prevent hydroplaning and loss of control. But we also reduce the noise. This was introduced by Purdue University through a research project, and the real goal was to reduce noise, and it has done just that. So this texturing on concrete pavements makes concrete pavements just as quiet as any of the asphalt pavements out there in service.
Okay. I'm curious about one other thing. I've encountered groove payment more often in northern colder states, and admittedly, that's anecdotal. I mean, that's just what I personally have encountered. And I'm curious, is that the case? Is it used more often there? And if so, why?
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. You may be referring to Minnesota or Wisconsin. They're honestly just cutting edge states when it comes to texturing their pavements and concrete pavement. So I think that that's pretty common. You also see a lot of grooving in Texas, and now in the Southeast, they're starting to see some issues with certain types of asphalt mixes that are designed to alleviate hydroplaning concerns, but they're seeing durability concerns within those asphalt mixes. So they're starting to look at maybe going to a more durable asphalt mix that's less inclined to improve, or less inclined to be good for hydroplaning. But then if they come back and they safety groove that asphalt, they'll improve it, right? So I think you're going to start to see more safety grooving in even the southeast region of the country.
Okay. Well, Nick, that's all I have. Is there anything else you want to add or that maybe I didn't ask about that you think I should have?
I don't know that I have anything more. I think that we really covered it quite well. I'll close out with just basically saying that, this is just an incredibly financially optimistic opportunity for the DOTs to consider, right? I think that while smoothness and the carbon impact is very important these days and worth consideration, the safety element is also very important. The Federal Highway Authority has the goal of reducing highway deaths to zero. Is that practical? I don't know if that's practical, but if we shoot for the star, hopefully we can land on the moons. So, I mean, I think the outcome here is that this is just an incredibly cheap and effective way to remediate our highways and make them better for all the users, both trucking and pedestrian and regular passenger vehicles.
Excellent. Nick, thank you very much for your time. I sure appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great day.